I'm not very good with direction. When we travel and I'm driving with my wife, it is not one of my gifting. I have to go to a place maybe 10 times to remember the place. I'm not quite good at knowing a place, because when we're going to a place, I'm generally absent-minded. If we're driving in the car and perhaps we're paying someone a visit, my mind is hardly there. But my wife will go to a place once and remember the place. In fact, if she can go to a place half time, she'll remember the place. She would, one time in London, we moved into this new apartment, and I went to work, and I came back, and I got into the car. I came back, and I'm close to the house, but I can't find the house. I picked up my phone, I called her, I said, I am near the house, but I can't find the house. I'm just 2 minutes away from it. I'm just going round and round and round in circle. I'm not good with direction. I'm not good with knowing direction. My wife is, and what she does is that when she travels on a road, she's constantly looking for landmarks. She's looking for signposts. She's looking for things that will remind her of where that road, of what that road is. And I'm not into that. And you and I know that life is a journey, and if you're going to get to destination, you are going to need to know the things you're going to see on the journey. If they tell you to go from here now to the island and you don't know how to get to the island, they'll tell you, well, you need to get to this place, there's a bridge, then there's this shop, and there's this supermarket. And so when you get to those things and you see those things, you know you are where? You know you are where? You are on the right road. You know, God is taking us somewhere. And I've come to let some people know this morning the things you need to see on the road in order to know that you're on the right road. I want to preach a sermon. A sermon this morning I've called The Road to Rehoboth. Somebody said the road to Rehoboth. The road to Rehoboth, Genesis chapter 26, verse 15, 19, and 22 this morning. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servant had dug in the days of Abraham, his father. But when Isaac's servant dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, this water is ours. So he called the name of the well Esek. Somebody say Esek. He called the name of the well Esek because they contended with him. Then they dug another well and they quarreled over that also. So he called his name Sitnah. Somebody say Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called his name Rehoboth, saying, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. Let's pray this morning. Heavenly Father, I have come to minister under your auction. Lord, I lend you my vocal cords. I lend you my mouth. I pray that the entrance of the word today will bring understanding. I pray that people will walk away from this sermon having met you, that they will receive something today that will guide them on their spiritual journey. In Jesus' name, and everyone said, I want to begin by looking at the place. There's a place in our text known as Rehoboth. Isaac describes that place for us. He says it's a place of enlargement. It's a place of freedom. The exact word he used, he said, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. Rehoboth is a place where you have room, you feel comfortable. It's a place where you feel settled. It's a place where you are fruitful. Rehoboth is different from where a lot of us are coming from, where we are constricted, where we are shackled, where we don't have a purpose. Rehoboth is that place where you feel free. You feel that you almost like you have arrived. Rehoboth is supposed to be a destination, and the man Isaac has found Rehoboth. He describes it as a place where room has been made for you, room has been made for us, and he says we shall be fruitful in the land. But can I tell you something? It's not just that Isaac describes Rehoboth. Rehoboth is also a promise that God has for every one of us. In Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11, God says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." So Rehoboth is not just something for the Isaacs of the Bible. Rehoboth is a promise that God has made to everyone sitting down here listening to me this morning. In fact, this text that I read is my father's favorite text. If my father is depressed and he's upset and things are not working well, this is a text that he goes to find solace. "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." So Rehoboth is not just something that Isaac found. Rehoboth is a promise that God has for everyone sitting here. That's a promise. But let me go further. Not only is Rehoboth a promise, Rehoboth is also a prayer. It's a prayer that a lot of people pray. I pray that prayer, you pray that prayer. You don't even know that you're praying it. But one man prayed that prayer. You see, in 1 Chronicles chapter 4 verse 10, when Jabez woke up one morning, you know the story of Jabez. This is a guy who was born, and who knows the circumstance of his birth. The parents gave him a bad name. They named the child according to the circumstance of his birth. They called him Jabez. They called him a son of sorrow. And you can imagine his life. You can imagine Jabez, just a constricted life, an uncomfortable life. He's not settled. One day Jabez woke up in the morning and he began to pray, and he asked God for Rehoboth. He said, and I read it, he said, "Oh, that you will bless me and enlarge my border." In that prayer he was asking for what? He was asking for Rehoboth. I can tell you that you have asked for Rehoboth without even knowing it. Here is Jabez. He says, "Oh, that you will enlarge me and you will enlarge me, that you will keep me from harm. Enlarge my border, enlarge my territory." Some translations will say that your hand might be with me. So there is that desire in every one of us to find Rehoboth. Turn to your neighbor and say, "Have you found Rehoboth?" There's a desire in our heart to find Rehoboth. There's a desire in our heart to find Rehoboth. I remember when our congregation started this church. This is going to be a sermon around the birth of this church. I remember when this church started, we were in the sitting room in my house. Things were not good. I didn't know whether I was supposed to be doing ministry again after what had happened. We sat in my sitting room. It was small. 14 people gathered in my sitting room. I can tell you that didn't feel like Rehoboth. It wasn't Rehoboth. I sat in the middle and had all these 14 people around me, and they're asking, "Pastor, have you come back to start a church?" I said, "Yeah," but in my heart I'm like, "My God, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing?" It wasn't Rehoboth. It was a small place. It was a tiny place. I felt constricted. I felt shackled. Ask your neighbor and say, "Do you feel shackled?" So when Jabez woke up in the morning and said, "Oh, that you will enlarge my territory," he's asking for Rehoboth. The problem with Rehoboth is that if you don't ask for it, you will never have it. If you're comfortable with that little place you are, you stay there. If you're comfortable with that little church, with that little business, with that little family, you see, Rehoboth is for people who would have the audacity to ask. Turn to your neighbor and say, "Do you have the audacity to ask?" Jabez asked for Rehoboth. "Enlarge my border, enlarge my territory, enlarge my business, enlarge my family." He asked for Rehoboth. Rehoboth is what the children of Israel did when they went from the desert into the promised land. It was Rehoboth. It was Rehoboth. Remember, they were slaves in Egypt. Remember, they felt very controlled in Egypt. Remember, they didn't have their own mind in Egypt. They were under somebody's leadership, under somebody's direction. And here is the children of Israel walking into Canaan. They were walking into what? They were walking into what? Into Rehoboth. They were walking into Rehoboth. Jabez prays for Rehoboth. The children of Israel walked into Rehoboth. And let me tell you, there's a Rehoboth for every one of us this morning. Turn to your neighbor and say, "There's a Rehoboth for every one of us this morning." You see, there's a Rehoboth for us in ministry. There's a Rehoboth for us in ministry. And I just told you a little lesson. I said we started with 13, 14 people. I can't even remember the number in a little my sitting room. I'm sitting down there and I'm thinking, God, would this even work? Would this even work? So there's Rehoboth for ministry, and that's the time you've gone to that place where God has visited your church, where your church is doing what it was supposed to do, where people are coming and you're fulfilling purpose. You're going to hear some testimonies today. You're going to hear some powerful testimonies today. But one of the critical times for me in this church was the day David's our keyboardist. The day David called me and said, Pastor Emmanuel, can I take you out for lunch? You don't know what that means for me. I know where we've come from. David said, Pastor, choose your restaurant. I'll take you out for lunch. You needed to have come here in 2016. You needed to have seen where he came from, where I came from, what we're dealing with. David's asking me, Pastor, can I take you out for lunch? Well, let me tell you, that's Rehoboth. Turn to your neighbor and say, that's Rehoboth. Rehoboth in ministry is when you begin to see your ministry begin to become the vision. God showed you something in a dream. And Rehoboth is that time when you begin to see the vision that God showed you. The thing that God said will happen. When you start seeing it happening, then you know you have entered the Rehoboth of ministry. What about the Rehoboth of marriage? Rehoboth of marriage. Let me tell you something. There comes a time in that marriage where you guys have come to a point where you love each other. You respect each other. You don't worry too much about each other's weaknesses anymore. You will not exchange each other for anything in the world. You may have started the marriage with a bit of bump. You may have started the marriage with a bit of not a good season. But Rehoboth, the time comes in that marriage when you have overcome all the problems and you enter a point in that marriage where even if they offered you $1 billion, you won't exchange $1 billion for your spouse. That's Rehoboth. The other day, my wife was, I was talking with Sister Anna. She said, Emma, our marriage is like wine. I said, what do you mean? She said, the marriage has gotten better with time. You know, the best wines are the ones that was kept under the basement for long. The best wine get better with time. It gets better with time. And I can tell you that our marriage wasn't this very good at the beginning. I remember marrying this foreign woman. I'm a Nigerian guy with my Nigerian mentality who were arguing about this and that and that. She said, this is how we're going to do something. And you know me very well with my stubbornness. And you know, Rehoboth comes in that marriage where you value the person more than your differences. When you've come to that point in your marriage where you know, my gosh, what can I do without this woman? What can I do without this man? Turn to your neighbor and say, have you found Rehoboth in your marriage? Because there's a Rehoboth in your marriage. You feel settled. You feel settled. You feel settled. You feel you can stand naked and not be what? And not be what? And not be ashamed. That Rehoboth, you know what? I feel settled. I feel settled. Have you found Rehoboth in your marriage? And there's Rehoboth in life. When you come to that point in your life where you found your purpose, you found what you were born to do, you're doing what God has created for you to do. That's Rehoboth. You've gone around the world and done this and done that. Then suddenly you are doing what you were born to do. You know, 2010, I was senior analyst program at American Express in London. I'm sitting down on my decks, and it's just white people. I'm the only black man on my team. And in front of me is Jerome Gordon. He's the vice president of American Express. Here is my line manager. Here is the director. I'm sitting down there. Even though I'm making lots of money, even though I'm writing computer programs, but I kind of felt that this was not what I was born to do. You see, Rehoboth is the day you leave what you're doing and find that thing that God created for you. When you find it, you have found Rehoboth. Turn to your neighbor and say, have you found your Rehoboth? Because that when you find, you know I found it. Let me tell you something. I'm born to preach. I was born to win souls. I was born to make disciples. I could have written 1 billion computer programs, but the joy I get from seeing a David, from seeing a Victor, from seeing a Samuel Friday, from seeing an Agnes, from seeing a Victoria find their purpose and begin to walk in the purpose of God for them, not even 1 million computer programs can give me that same joy. Turn to your neighbor again and say, have you found your Rehoboth? So, the question then that you must ask me is, Pastor Emmanuel, on the road to Rehoboth, what are we going to find along the way? Does that make sense? Oh, Pastor Emmanuel, you found your Rehoboth. Can you kind of show? We need to expect as we journey to our Rehoboth. If life is a journey to Rehoboth, if life is a journey to that place where you have found your purpose, you found your partner, you found what God has called you to be. If life is a journey to that place where you are, the room has been made for you, where you're settled. (2020), this church almost closed down. Pandemic. Almost closed down. So, if this is Rehoboth, then I need to let you know. See, on the road to Rehoboth, so you know you are on the right road. So what is the first thing that Rehoboth answers to? The men and women who find Rehoboth, what are the things? A well. They weren't certified to go and fetch water from a well that already had water. They weren't certified to go to a river that already had water in it. They began to dig their own well. Let me ask you a question. When are you going to start that business? Manana, later, the next time we're coming for your funeral. When are you going to start that business? You see, Rehoboth answers to what? Pioneering. You got to start something new. You got to try to do something new. They began to dig a well. They didn't, as I said, they were not ready to just go and get water from a well that was already dug. They felt, listen, we're going to dig a well. Let me ask you a question. How long are you going to keep postponing that plan that God gave you? How long are you going to keep postponing that idea that God gave you? I don't care how small that idea is. Even if that idea is to get a little bit of money and start selling tomato or start doing something or go into farming, let me ask you a question. When are you going to pioneer? Turn to your neighbor and say, when are you going to pioneer something? When are people going to look at something and say, Brother Mike built it? When are people going to look at something and say, Juwon built this? When are people going to look at something and say, Sister Eka built this thing? Are you going to depart from this world and have nothing on your name? Nothing with your name on it. They began to dig a well. They were going to pioneer a well. They were not satisfied with what other people have done. Let me say that again. Let me say that again. God has called you into ministry. The other day, Brother Obon came to me. He made a statement. He said, Pastor, I really feel the call of God over my life, but I don't know how to start. I don't know how to begin. I don't know how to start. You see, Rehoboth is for the men and women who have the courage to do what? To do what? To do what? So the first point of this sermon is, when are you going to go out? When are you going to go out and do what? And do what? That meeting in my house in 2016 with 13, 14 people, what they didn't know that was my mind was 50-50. 50-50. Imagine if I looked at the pioneering work and said, no, I'm not doing it. That means I wouldn't know Sister Ndidi today. I wouldn't have met this beautiful sister, Sister BC today. I wouldn't have met Chibuzo. Just look at what one man's determination to pioneer has put. Oh, my son, Kenny Adenokon. He says he's my son, but every now and then he abandons me and runs away. I wouldn't have met Kenny. Listen, I'm meeting all of you because one man had the courage to do what? To do what? Pioneer something. Let me ask you, when are you going to pioneer something? When are you going to start something? Start a business, start a ministry, do something. When are you going to pioneer something? So Rehoboth answers to pioneering. You have the idea, but you keep postponing it. You keep postponing it. Keep postponing it. You see, if you keep postponing the idea, you keep postponing what? You keep postponing what? Rehoboth. Turn to your neighbor and say, are you postponing Rehoboth? Because if you keep postponing the idea, you keep postponing Rehoboth. Let me give you an idea. Let me give you an idea. I woke up one morning and I'm thinking, you know what are we going to do? God gave me this idea. He said, start a mission center. Start a mission center. In Ogudu. How many people are from Ogudu here? Put your hands up if you're from Ogudu. Put your hands up if you're from Ogudu. Oh, there's faith from Ogudu. There's faith from Ogudu. Now let me ask you a question. If I didn't go out to pioneer Ogudu, would we have these people? You see, your blessing is locked up in a place, and you won't have that thing until you do what? Pioneer. So turn to your neighbor and say, Rehoboth answers to anybody from Cbchurchng here. Put your hands up if you're from Cbchurchng. What if the day God says, go to Cbchurchng and pioneer that work? I said, no, I can't do it. Put your hands up from Cbchurchng. Anyone from Ikorodu here? Put your hands up from Ikorodu. So look at this. Listen, this is a product of what? Product of what? Pioneering. Let me ask you a question. When are you going to pioneer that idea God has given you? When are you going to go off and start that business God has told you to start? When are you going to go off and do that ministry that God has given you? Because your destiny lies in Rehoboth. Turn to your neighbor and say, your destiny is in. And Rehoboth answers to pioneering. They're all going to be P's for easy remembrance. The second thing it answers to is that it answers to perspective. In that text, the text told us that Isaac's father Abraham had dug some well, and the Philistines did what? They did what? They destroyed it. Yeah? So Isaac's father had dug some well. The Philistines filled the well with water, just literally destroyed it. So here's the thing. If Isaac focused on the past, he will not find motivation for Rehoboth. Because the past contained failures. If he was looking at the past, he will see my father did it and they broke it down. He will see the Philistines took all the things my father did, and you see, let me tell you, some of you, the reason why you are where you are is that there is a demonic fixation with the past. You have a demonic fixation with the past. The Benin boy broke your heart. Now every Benin boy is a devil. The Mbise man messed you up. Now every Mbise man is a devil. Every time your vocabulary is a vocabulary of the past. Have you talked to people before? And their vocabulary is a vocabulary of the past. Let me tell you, a lot of us, our past do not motivate us. And if our past do not motivate us, what we do is we change our perspective. And we put our mind in the future. Imagine if Isaac was constantly thinking about the failures of the past, thinking about the well that Abraham dug and the Philistines shut down the well. He will not do what he did today. You see, sometimes you have to change perspective. Turn to your neighbor and say, change perspective. Let me failures in my past. I can tell you some failures in my past. If you're looking for the past to motivate you, sometimes all you find in the past is discouragement. And the people who find Rehoboth are men and women who forget the past. Paul said, this one thing that I do. Am I talking to the right people this morning? Paul said, this one thing that I do, forgetting the what? You see, so you got to forget the past. That relationship of the past did not work. That business of the past did not work. Take your eyes off the past and focus on the future. The men and women who find Rehoboth are men and women who take their eyes off from the failures of the past and focus on the future. So the second thing Rehoboth answers to is what? Perspective. What are you looking at? What are you looking at? Is the glass half full or is it half empty? You see, a lot depends on where you're looking at. When you're looking at, a lot depends on what you're looking at. What direction are you looking at? They meet you and you're still talking about what happened in 1990. Amaka disappointed you. If Amaka disappointed you, go to Ifoma. Just move. Let me tell you something. Can I tell you something? If you know how many girls that bounced me in KICC in London, if I tell you how many girls that bounced me in KICC in London, but I found a formula. Formula is forward ever. Just be going. Be going. So I met this girl in KICC. She bounced me. I moved forward. Then I met another, I don't want to call their names because they're watching. Listen, let me tell you what's going on now. Some girls are thinking, don't be that guy who will bounce. Right? Then I met another, I remember meeting this girl in KICC church. KICC in London, 5,000 people. Service has finished. I saw, I like them beautiful. So I go after this girl. I meet her. Service have finished. I thought maybe Pastor Matthew's sermon will create an environment for, to make moves. I go to her. I say, what's your name? She looked, let me tell you, she looked at me from top to bottom. Did not utter a word. I moved. I looked around to make sure nobody saw what happened. And I moved too. Let me tell you, as they kept bouncing, I kept moving forward. I forgot the past. I didn't know that she was waiting for me in the future. Let me tell you something. Stop looking at the past. Stop looking at the past. Turn to your neighbor and say, face your future. You see, Rehoboth answers to perspective. Look forward. Turn to your neighbor and say, look forward. So what's the next thing Rehoboth answers to? Rehoboth answers to progression. Can I say something to these young people? We're going to be doing Yahoo no be option at the end of the month. Things are bad in our nation. Let me tell you something. Rehoboth answers to progression. Let me tell young people something. Rehoboth is not a revolution. Rehoboth is an evolution. Yes, let me say that again. Some of you think Rehoboth, you meet these pastors and they tell you, come, we just pour anointing oil on your head. Boom. That's why some of you, all your hair is gone. It's all greasy. They just use anointing oil and pour. Let me tell you, if anybody tells you that Rehoboth is a revolution, it is not. Every now and then God will do something that kind of take you 3 steps forward. But go and ask people who have found their Rehoboth. They'll tell you that Rehoboth is is not a revolution. Rehoboth is what? An evolution. One step after another step. Are you listening to me? One step after another step. Precept upon precept. Somebody say precept upon precept. You get to Rehoboth not in one go. You get to Rehoboth as a progression. Somebody say progression. A progression. If you keep making forward moves forward, you get to Rehoboth. And if anybody comes to tell you that, boom, that's why people are using their girlfriends for money. Because they think Rehoboth is what? Is what? Is what? Revolution. Rehoboth is not a revolution. Rehoboth is a what? Is a what? An evolution. It's an evolution. It's an evolution. Even God did not do a revolution. He turned up in Genesis chapter 1. He said, oh, okay, let there be light. And then there was light. Then he looked at it. Then he said, let there be this. Then let there be that. Even God with all his omnipotence did not do a revolution. God with all his omnipotence subjected himself to what? To what? Evolution. Who are you? Who are you? I turn to your neighbor and say, subject yourself to evolution. Rehoboth is a product of what? A product of what? Evolution. I'm worried now. Even the guys who work in my house. When they come to my house, I'm careful. Before somebody gets an idea that pastor can be used for the ritual. You know, when my daughters were here, they finished washing their things in the washing machine. And when they put their pants out, I go and count it. And when everybody's leaving my house, I go and count it again. There are all kinds of ideas in these people's mind these days. You might think pastors, children's, what's that? Underwear. It may be because it's also anointed. If we use it, it will give us more money. Turn to your neighbor and say, Rehoboth is an evolution. It's an evolution. Mark chapter 4 verse 28. Mark chapter 4 verse, let's read it together. Mark chapter 4 verse 28. Read it together. The air produces by itself. First the word, the blade. Then the word, the ear. Then the word, the full grain in the air. But when the grain is ripe at once, he puts in the sickle because they have. This is a law of progression. Rehoboth answers to progression. The moment you start looking for Rehoboth in revolution, you run into some trouble. That's when girlfriend will be used for ritual. That's when your mom will be used for ritual. That's when you start walking the path of ritual, because they told you can have revolution as a product of, or you can have Rehoboth as a product of what? As a product of what? Revolution. Understand that the Bible doesn't teach a Rehoboth as a product of revolution. The Bible teaches Rehoboth as a product of evolution. Here's where it gets more interesting. Rehoboth answers to problems. Answers to problems. I'm going to share a story, but I need to share it properly. You say, Pastor, well, where is it in the text? Isaac and his servants went and dug a well. Isaac. The actual Hebrew word Isaac, you know what it means? Isaac stands for contention. It means fight. Don't ever think that the journey to Rehoboth will be fight-free. There are people determined to make sure you don't get to Rehoboth. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. You know, when I came on the word, I thought I was a nice. By being nice to people, they'll be nice to you. Let me tell you something. You are going to be nice to people on your way to Rehoboth, and they will want to hurt you. They want to contend with you. Isaac and his people had dug a well. They dug a well. This well was supposed to produce water for everyone, but they fought him over the well. People are good. Let me tell you, people you have blessed will one day fight you. Get that in your mind. In fact, people that you're fighting for will one day turn around and fight against you. Isaac, they built this well, and he called the well Isaac. Isaac stands for contention. Contention. I remember taking over a church ago. This is about 2010. I took over this church and boom, revival began. God began like he's doing here. God began to save people, began to help people. And then I looked around and saw what God was doing, and I said, you know what, guys, we're getting these people saved, but my discipleship model must include empowering them to stand on their 2 feet, because if a man gets saved and he's not economically empowered, economic forces will act like gravity and drag him back to the gutters of sin. I thought that was a good idea. The next thing, there was contention. There's contention. Contention, so much contention that we had to leave the church and go back to England. 2010 to 2015, we had to pass and listen, okay, I'm done. Take your church, going back to England. That's Cbchurchng. The road to Rehoboth will be filled with problems and contention. It's not every idea you have that will work. It's not every project you start that will work. The people who get to Rehoboth are men and women. Let me tell you, people who get to Rehoboth are great managers of failure. They are men and women who know how to manage failure. They know how to turn failure around. So here is, listen, Rehoboth, let me tell you something. Rehoboth will never happen until Cbchurchng happens. Rehoboth will never happen until Sitna happens. If you're sitting down thinking, I'll just get my Rehoboth without Cbchurchng, this is a spiritual law. Nobody has ever gotten to Rehoboth who didn't first get. You know you're on the right road. You know you're on the right road when there are problems on that road. Let me tell somebody here, the obstacle is the way. The obstacle is the way. So they began to build the well. They built Cbchurchng. Cbchurchng failed. That word, when you go check your concordance, the meaning of Sitna means enmity. Let me tell you something. The road to Rehoboth will leave you with many enemies. Just understand that. It will leave you with many enemies. There are people who are going to become your enemy on the road to Rehoboth. That road to Rehoboth will go past Cbchurchng. Cbchurchng means contention. They're going to fight with you, and you're trying to do the right thing. I'm only trying to dig what? What am I trying to dig? I'm trying to dig a well to produce water that will feed this place, and you're fighting me. You're frustrating me. You're giving me wahala and headache. Understand that that's what happens on the road to Rehoboth. You know, imagine if Isaac quit at Cbchurchng, which is what some of you have done. At the first appearance of resistance, you gave up. That's why Rehoboth answers to persistence. Rehoboth answers to what? Persistence. Just imagine. Imagine after he built Cbchurchng, they contended with him and he stopped. If he stopped at Cbchurchng, would there be Rehoboth? Would there be Rehoboth? You know, before we came to Nigeria, we went in our previous organization. So we went to a place called Camden. Camden is in where? What side of London is that? Huh? North London. Camden is in North London. So we went to Camden. The organization we were in, we went to Camden and they said, okay, go. Let's see whether God really called you. This is how it's done. Let's really see whether there's a calling over your life. So they sent me and Sister Anna, Claudine to Camden. I'll go to Camden. We begin to do ministry in Camden. A lot of you will think, I know I've never shared this. The first pastor I pastored was in Anthony Village. First place I pastored the church was in Camden. So we began to pastor this place in Camden. Revival broke out. Sudanese people, women, and people began to turn up in church. I go to the organization and the pastor. I said, let me take this church. Let me pioneer this church. I said, no. No. I got very discouraged. Then I come back to Nigeria and begin and go to Anthony Village. And then revival explodes. Then the next thing, there's contention. Let me ask you a question. If I allowed Camden to discourage me, if I allowed Anthony's Village to discourage me, would we have Magodo? So, Rehoboth answers to what? Persistence. Persistence. This is why Winston Churchill, the shortest speech Winston Churchill ever gave, he walked into Harrow High School. That was his secondary or primary school, and everybody's looking at Winston Churchill. They know he's the Prime Minister of England. They are thinking, what is he going to say? These little boys are watching. Winston Churchill stands up, picks up the phone, and he said, never, ever, ever, ever give up. And he drops the microphone. Never, ever, ever give up. I don't know who has walked into this service today and you're planning to throw in the towel. Don't throw in the towel. Don't talk to your neighbor and say, don't throw in the towel. Threw in the towel at Isaac, he won't have Sidna. If he threw in the towel at Sidna, he won't have Rehoboth. So Rehoboth answers to what? Rehoboth answers to persistence. You have to persevere. I want to talk to the pastors here. Not all your plans will work. Not all your ideas will work. Let me tell you, if I tell you the amount of ideas we have generated in this church that failed, you'll be like, Pastor, why are you still generating ideas? Why are you still generating ideas? You see, you are going to overcome Isaac and Sidna. Some of you here, that relationship hasn't worked. Okay. Isaac and Sidna. You have to survive Isaac and Sidna. If not, you're not going to have Rehoboth. So as we stand here today, and I'm looking at all these people. In fact, there's a plan Anna and I have about a church in London. I'll release that to the church at some point. Working on a church in London. If we didn't do what we did, if we didn't survive Isaac and Sidna, look at Coach Jude. Imagine if I allowed Isaac to mess me up. I wouldn't know Coach Jude. I'm good friends with Barrister. I always enjoy his company. Sometimes I sit down and I think, I would never have known Barrister if I allowed Isaac to take me out. I would never have known Mike if I allowed Sidna to take me out. Pastor Obed, what a blessing. I would never have known him. I wonder what Isaac that you're dealing with today and you want to give up. You see, if you give up at Isaac, you can't have what? You can't have what? You can't have what? Rehoboth. So let's summarize this sermon because I'm supposed to preach very short today. Let's summarize this sermon. So let's I want to make sure that you've got this sermon right. Let's summarize this sermon. So we said that let's look at the 4 things that Rehoboth must answer to, and we end. First one is Rehoboth answers to what? The answer to what? And what are you supposed to do with that bit? What did I say you're supposed to do with that bit? Go and start something. Apply for that visa. Stop procrastinating. Turn to your neighbor, say, stop procrastinating. What's the worst that will happen? You die now. Now you be the first to die. You die, you die. You do it, you die. You don't do it, you still die. So why don't you just do it? Just do it. So the first one is what? First one is what? It answers to what? Pioneering. The second one is answers to what? Perspective. It answers to perspective. What is the summary of that one? What do I mean by perspective? What did I say about that one? Forgetting the past and keep your eyes on the future. On the future. The third one is what? Progression. Rehoboth is not a what? It's not a what? It's not a what? It's not a revolution. Rehoboth is a what? An evolution. It's an evolution. And the final one is that Rehoboth answers to what? Problems. It answers to problems, right? You're going to find problems on the way. What are those problems that Isaac found on the way? One is what? Isaac. The second one is what? Sidna. And the final one is that Rehoboth answers to what? The only people who get to Rehoboth are men and women who continued and continued and continued and never gave up. Today we have, and let me tell you, God says, Emmanuel, you're going to pastor 14,000 people in this church. This is still not Rehoboth. This is still not Rehoboth. The folks who will get to Rehoboth are men and women who continue to move forward without giving up. Let's give God praise this morning. Give him praise this morning. I want every head bowed, all eyes closed. Every head bowed, all eyes closed. I just hope, trying to put this together in a short form. I hope you've walked away from this service today and something. I just hope that you come back here in 2 months, 3 months, and say, Pastor, I heard that sermon. That sermon is the reason why I started this ministry. I started this business. That sermon is the reason why I went out and asked her out, and now I'm married. That sermon is the reason why we have a family now. Pastor, I'm beginning to enjoy my Rehoboth. That will be a blessing to hear that in 2-3 months, even next week. Pastor, I heard your sermon, and I just went and began to pioneer. I began to pioneer. And when I heard your sermon and I began to progress, I knew problems will come, but I didn't allow the problems to kill me. I put my hands my eyes in the future. I just continued looking forward. I forgot the failures and the discouragement of the past. But there's something this morning that we must do. If we don't do it, even when you find Rehoboth, it won't mean anything. There are a lot of people who found Rehoboth who are in hell today. Men and women have found Rehoboth and they are burning in hell today. Men and women have found Rehoboth and they are in hell today for all eternity. Please don't find Rehoboth if you have not first found Jesus. Rehoboth only makes sense when you carry Jesus into your Rehoboth. If Jesus is not in your Rehoboth will mean nothing. If you're here this morning, heads bowed, eyes closed, this is the most important part of this service. Nobody looking around. You're here this morning. You say, Pastor Emmanuel, if I died today, I'm not sure I'll go to heaven.